Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an emotional story full of profound revelations. Let's meet Magnolia Vance, a trauma nurse who dedicated her life to science and logic until a tragic accident led to a near-death experience. She met Jesus face-to-face and received a devastating revelation about the true false prophet and the deceptions that lead millions away from the truth. What she saw and heard will challenge everything you think you know about faith and eternity. Before we start, leave your like key, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this transformative and impactful journey. My name is Magnolia Vance, and for over a decade I was a trauma nurse at Tucson Medical Center, Arizona. Every day I dealt with chaos, pain, and occasionally the triumph of saving a life. Science was my guide, and logic was my companion. There was never room for the supernatural in my routine, only for the tangible, what could be seen, diagnosed, and treated. That Tuesday morning, the sun seemed especially bright as I drove down Broadway Boulevard toward the hospital. Traffic was light, and I felt relatively relaxed considering my shift was 12 hours long. At a short stop at the traffic light, I looked at the passenger seat and saw my badge hanging from the rearview mirror. Ready for another day, I muttered to myself. As soon as the traffic light turned green, I continued forward. I didn't see the truck until it was too late. He appeared out of nowhere, speeding toward the intersection. A deafening sound took over the moment as the impact sent my car crashing into a pole. Everything seemed in slow motion, the glass shattering, the seatbelt cutting into my shoulder, the car dashboard pressing into my legs. After that, there was only silence. When I opened my eyes again, everything was strange. The chaos around me felt frozen. I could see my wrecked car and my body trapped inside it. But something was different. I was there, but I wasn't there either. A feeling of lightness, of detachment, took over me. This can't be happening, I thought. Trying to process what I saw, I floated, feeling no pain or fear, just a strange, disconcerting peace. When I looked down and saw the paramedics trying to get me out of the car, a realization began to form. Am I dead? Before I could answer my own question, something changed on the horizon. A light began to emerge, growing in intensity and heat. It was unlike any light I had ever seen, a light that seemed to call to me, to envelop me, and that's when I heard my name, Magnolia. The voice was like soft thunder, powerful and filled with love. I knew in that instant that my life would never be the same. I floated above the crash scene, seeing everything from above with a clarity that defied logic. My body was trapped in the car, with the dashboard crushing my legs and the steering wheel against my chest. The windshield was shattered, and the side of the car looked like it had been folded like paper. I could hear the muffled sound of sirens approaching, but it was as if I was in another dimension, watching everything through an invisible veil. That's not possible, I thought, trying to rationalize what I saw. I was a nurse. I understood what serious trauma was, but I had never thought that I would be there, the victim. As I watched the paramedics trying to reach me, I felt something strange, an absolute detachment. There was no pain, no fear, just a calm that made no sense of the situation. Suddenly, everything around me started to change. The daylight became a soft twilight, and the sound of the physical world disappeared completely. An absolute silence took over, but it was not a void. It was a silence full of meaning, as if waiting for something to happen. That's when I saw the light. It seemed to appear from afar, growing in intensity and heat. It wasn't like any light we know here. It didn't hurt your eyes, but it wasn't something you could ignore either. It was as if every particle of this light was alive, radiating love, peace, and a warmth that enveloped everything around. Magnolia, the voice echoed again. It was deep, like thunder, but at the same time soft and full of compassion. It was a voice I had never heard before, but it seemed strangely familiar. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was Jesus Christ. As the light approached, I felt a magnetic force pull me towards it, but not violently. It was as if my entire being was drawn to something infinitely greater, something that I knew to be the source of all that was good and true. "Come," the voice said again, and before I could hesitate, I was completely enveloped in light. Everything around me disappeared. There was no more accident. There was no more car. I was in a different place, and every part of me knew there was no return. When I was enveloped by the light, I felt something that could never be described in human words. It was as if all the weight of my existence had disappeared. There was no pain, worry, or fear. All that was left was a love so pure, so absolute, that I felt completely exposed and, at the same time, completely accepted. It was then that I saw him. In the center of that light was Jesus. He didn't need to introduce himself. I just knew who he was. His presence radiated immense authority, but also a love so deep that it seemed to fill every void within me. He was both majestic and accessible, infinitely powerful, and yet close. "Magnolia," he said again, and this time, his voice resonated with every part of my being. It wasn't just a sound. It was as if he was speaking directly to my soul. "Sir?" The word escaped my lips without me even thinking about it. At that moment, there were no doubts. There was no room for questioning. He was who he said he was, and I stood before truth personified. Jesus took a step towards me, and I fell to my knees, not out of fear, but because it seemed to be the only possible response to his presence. He reached out his hand, and when he touched my shoulder, it felt like my entire life was being laid bare before us. Images began to emerge, as if projected into the light around us. I saw moments from my childhood, my adolescence, the days I spent in the hospital saving lives. I saw the times when I was kind, but also the times when I judged, when I closed myself off from spiritual possibilities. There was no judgment in his eyes, just deep love mixed with sadness. "You have done much good," he said, "but there is so much you still do not understand." I wanted to respond, to ask what he meant, but there was no need for words. It was as if he already knew all my questions, even before I asked them. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand again. "There's something I need to show you, something the world needs to know." Without hesitation, I held his hand, and the moment I did, we were transported to another place. The light around us changed, and I knew I was about to see something that would change my life forever. Holding Jesus' hand, I was transported to a scene that seemed like a mix of memory and spiritual reality. I was in a vast, barren desert, with dunes that stretched as far as my eyes could see. The air was warm but not suffocating. On the horizon, I could make out human figures gathered around a man who was standing, speaking intensely. "We are in the past," said Jesus, and his voice carried a mixture of compassion and seriousness. He pointed to the man in the center of the crowd. "You see Muhammad?" The name hit me like thunder. I knew who he was, or thought I knew. The founder of one of the world's greatest religions, revered by millions. Seeing Muhammad there, in the flesh, was surreal. He gestured as he spoke, and the crowd seemed captivated. His voice was strong, charismatic, and his words carried conviction. "Why are you showing me this, sir?" I asked, even though I could already feel the answer would be devastating. "So that you may see the truth," Jesus replied, looking at Muhammad with an expression that mixed love and sadness. He was a sincere man, but he was deceived, and now many follow a path that takes them away from me. As he watched, Muhammad's words began to turn into visions. I saw scrolls being written, words being copied and read aloud. It was as if the doctrines he preached were coming to life before me. "See what he taught," said Jesus. His hand rose, and the words appeared in the air as if written in fire. "Jesus is not the Son of God. Jesus was not crucified. There is no need for a Savior." Each statement felt like a dagger to my soul. I turned to Jesus, expecting to see anger or indignation, but all I saw was sadness. "They believe they are honoring me," he said, "but these words turn millions away from me. They deny my divinity, my sacrifice, and the only way to salvation." I wanted to look away, but Jesus held my hand, firm and compassionate. "You need to see it," he said. The scene changed, and I saw people over the centuries following these doctrines. I saw mosques being built, crowds praying, children learning to recite words they had been taught as truth. But I also saw something darker. I saw invisible spiritual chains, tying these people up, preventing them from seeing the light. "These chains," Jesus explained, "are not physical. They are made of deception. Each of them believes they are on the right path, but they have been led to deny me." My hands were shaking, but Jesus continued to hold me. "All is not lost," he said, with a spark of hope in his eyes. "Many can still be achieved. That's why I'm showing you this." The vision began to fade, but I knew I would never forget what I had seen. As soon as the visions of the past disappeared, I felt an icy cold pass through my being. The light that was once warm and welcoming seemed to have receded, giving way to a heavy, oppressive darkness. It was as if I was being taken to another place, a place that did not belong in the presence of Jesus. My initial instinct was to resist, but he held my hand and said, "You need to see this, Magnolia. It's necessary." Suddenly, we were facing an immense abyss, dark as night. On the other side, a kind of pulsating veil seemed to separate two realities. Jesus stretched out his hand, and the veil opened, revealing something I never imagined I would witness: the eternal destiny of lost souls. The first thing that hit me was the sound, a collective lament, a cry of despair that seemed to have no end. Thousands, perhaps millions, of voices cried out at once, but there was no relief in their words, only regret and terror. I saw a woman kneeling, her face contorted in agony. She murmured incessantly, as if she were repeating prayers. "I did everything right," she said. "I followed every rule. I prayed 5 times a day. I fasted. Why am I here?" Jesus looked at her with a love so deep it almost made me cry, but his words were firm. "You did all this, but you rejected me. You denied who I am. You denied my sacrifice. And without me, there is no way to the Father." Beside her, a man shouted, "But I gave to the poor. I lived a righteous life. Why wasn't that enough?" "Because good works cannot save," Jesus replied sadly. "Without faith in me, human righteousness is like filthy rags." Jesus' words were true, but difficult to hear. It was painful to see the reality of these souls. Each of them had believed something that seemed true, but that led them away from God. However, in the midst of this devastating vision, Jesus showed me another scene. Some souls, even while trapped in deception, have had moments of revelation. I saw a young girl in a small village who had a dream about Jesus, where he revealed himself as the Son of God. Against everything and everyone, she chose to follow him, risking her life. Now she was in paradise, full of joy and peace. Jesus looked me straight in the eye and said, "There is hope, Magnolia, but many need to hear the truth before it is too late." He held my hand tighter, and in an instant, we were taken from that vision. My heart was still heavy, but inside me, something was beginning to change. I knew this journey was much bigger than I had imagined. When the darkness around us lifted, I felt an immediate sense of relief as I was once again enveloped by the radiant light of Jesus. Peace returned, but the weight of what I had just witnessed was still present in my heart. He led me to a new place, different from the abyss we had left behind. It was a field teeming with life, with tall trees, lush green grass, and a sky that seemed to vibrate with colors I had never seen before. "I want you to see another part of the story," Jesus said, his voice still charged with love and urgency. "Not everyone who has been deceived remains lost. My spirit still works in places you cannot imagine." Before us, scenes appeared that seemed to materialize out of thin air. I saw a small village, with simple houses made of clay and straw. Inside one of these houses, a young girl was kneeling, her hands holding an old, worn-out piece of paper. It was a page from a Bible. "She found this page by chance," Jesus explained, "but it was enough for my spirit to touch her heart." The young woman closed her eyes, and tears ran down her face. In her native language, she whispered, "Jesus, if you are more than a prophet, show me." The next moment I saw the young woman fall asleep and be transported into a vision. There was Jesus, dressed in white, reaching out to her. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he said. When the young woman awoke, her face was illuminated with a peace that transcended understanding. "She risked everything to follow me," Jesus explained. "Her family rejected her, and her community cast her out. But she found eternal life." Another scene unfolded. This time, it was a man in a big city. He was walking quickly along a busy street when something made him stop in front of a Christian church. He didn't know why, but he felt an irresistible need to enter. Inside, he heard the true gospel for the first time, and tears ran down his face as he prayed, giving his life to Christ. "These are the miracles that happen every day," said Jesus Imarkin with a gleam of hope in his eyes. "But many still resist. They don't know that time is short." These scenes of transformation brought deep comfort but also a sense of urgency. I knew these stories of hope needed to be shared so more people could discover the truth before it was too late. When Jesus held my hand again, I felt the environment around me change once again. This time, we were transported to the world I knew, but from a new perspective. I saw planet Earth below us, spinning in its blue and green immensity. From there, we descend into everyday life, into busy streets, classrooms, temples, and houses. Jesus showed me scenes from modern life, and what I saw was as impactful as the previous visions. We began in a country where children were kneeling in a simple hall, repeating prayers they had learned since they could speak. Their voices were sweet, full of devotion, but there was something that hit me like a punch. Their words were based on a distorted belief. They are being taught from an early age to deny my divinity, Jesus explained. They are led to believe that I am just a prophet, an ordinary man, and not the Son of God. The scenes changed to a family gathered in a living room. A man read aloud from a sacred book, and his wife and children listened attentively. He spoke with passion, deeply believing in his words. "They are sincere," said Jesus, "but they are sincerely wrong. Sincerity does not change the truth." What struck me most were the expressions on the children's faces. They looked at their father with confidence, absorbing every word. I realized that, without knowing it, they were being prepared for a life based on a spiritual deception. How can they know the truth if they never had the opportunity to hear it? I asked, my voice shaking. Jesus looked at me with tenderness, but also with a seriousness that was impossible to ignore. "That's why I send dreams, visions, and even missionaries to achieve them," he replied. "But many resist or never get the chance to listen, and you, Magnolia, are one of the voices that needs to share the truth." I also saw another reality. A man, in what appeared to be a large city, was sitting at an office desk with a tired face. He opened a social network on his computer, and a video appeared on his screen. It was the testimony of a person who had met Jesus. He watched for a few minutes, but closed the flap with a sigh, telling himself, "This isn't for me." "Millions stand on the edge of the truth," Jesus said, "but few choose to take the step of faith." These visions of the present were as powerful as those of the past and eternal destiny. They showed how people around the world are being taught to reject the real Jesus. At the same time, I saw how he continues to work, through all barriers, to reach those who are willing to listen. The light around us began to fade, and I realized something was changing. I was still holding Jesus' hand, but his expression had become more serious, almost urgent. I felt a light pressure, as if I was being pulled back, away from his presence. "It's time to return, Magnolia," Jesus said softly but also firmly. "Go back?" "But I don't want to go," I replied, feeling the tears start to stream down my face. How could I return to my normal life after everything I had seen, after having been with him? "You have to," he continued. "There is much work to be done. What you saw cannot remain with you alone. They need to know, Magnolia. Time is short, and many stand on the brink of eternity without knowing the truth." Suddenly, I felt a greater force beginning to pull me, but this time it wasn't the peace I had felt before. It was as if I was being pushed back into a more limited, denser existence. My mind fought it, but my spirit knew Jesus was right. "You won't be alone," he said, his soft voice filling the space around me. "I will be with you, and I will give you the right words when you need them. Trust me." As the surrounding light began to dissipate, the surroundings changed again. Now I was in a dark place, and I felt like I was being sucked into a tunnel. There was a crushing pressure on my chest, and the heavenly peace was replaced by a heavy awareness of my physical body. And then, I heard voices, confusing at first, but becoming clearer. "She's coming back." Blood pressure rising, heart rate regularizing. My eyes shot open, and I was greeted by the cold light of the hospital lamps. My vision was blurry, but I recognized the familiar faces of my fellow doctors and nurses. Their expressions were one of shock and relief at the same time. "Magnolia," the voice of Peter Langley, one of the hospital doctors, was full of disbelief. "You're alive. My God, we lost you for over 9 minutes. That's not possible." I wanted to respond, but my mind was still processing everything that had happened. I had been dead, clinically dead, for 9 minutes and 17 seconds, but what I experienced during that time was more real than anything I had ever experienced. "You shouldn't be alive," another doctor commented, shaking his head. "Not after so long without oxygen. It's a miracle. Miracle." The word echoed in my mind. They had no idea how right they were. As they checked my vitals and exchanged confused looks, one thing was clear to me. I had come back with a purpose. Sitting in the hospital bed, surrounded by perplexed doctors and nurses, my mind was still processing everything that had happened. The sounds of the heart monitor, the muffled murmur of conversations around me, everything seemed distant. My heart was here, but my soul still felt the presence of Jesus, like a constant echo in my being. Peter Langley, my fellow doctor, approached, leaning in slightly to speak to me. "Magnolia, do you know what happened? We lost you for over 9 minutes. The heart just stopped, and we didn't expect you to come back." He hesitated before adding, "Much less without brain damage." I looked at him, trying to find the right words. How could I explain something so extraordinary? "I know," I whispered, my voice hoarse and weak. "I was somewhere else. I saw things, Peter. Things that changed everything." He frowned, confused. "Another place? Are you talking about a hallucination? That can happen in prolonged cardiac arrest. Your brain." "It wasn't the brain," I interrupted, more forcefully than I intended. My breathing became heavy and tears began to flow. I was with Jesus. He showed me things, the past, the future, and what's happening now. He told me I have a mission. Peter backed away a little, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. His eyes showed the internal struggle between his friendship with me and his skeptical nature as a doctor. The following days were a whirlwind. Doctors ran test after test, trying to understand how I had survived and, more importantly, how there was no brain damage after so long without oxygen. Each test gave the same result. I was completely healthy, which only increased the mystery for them. For me, however, there was no mystery. I knew I was alive because Jesus brought me back to life with a purpose. During my recovery, I encountered an unexpected figure who would play a pivotal role in my mission. Sister Eleanor Hayes, a kind, elderly nun who used to visit patients in the hospital, appeared at my bedside one day. His presence was comforting, almost like Jesus. "I heard about what happened to you," she said softly, holding my hand, "and something in my heart told me that you would need help understanding what you saw." Somehow, I knew she was right. I shared my experience with her, from encountering Jesus to visions of deception and lost souls. Her eyes watered, but she remained calm. "You have a mission, Magnolia," she said, her voice firm, "but it will be a difficult journey. Many will doubt you, some will even ridicule. However, the truth you carry can save lives, both here and in eternity. You must not hesitate." Her words stuck in my mind. At that moment, I decided that no matter how challenging it was, I would fulfill the mission Jesus had given me. After I was released from the hospital, my life was never the same. Every moment seemed charged with meaning. I knew I couldn't return to my routine as a trauma nurse without fulfilling the purpose Jesus had entrusted to me. The images of lost souls, the screams of despair, and the invisible chains were still fresh in my mind. But most of all, Jesus' words echoed constantly in my heart. Time is short. Many are just a heartbeat away from an eternal destiny they do not expect. At first, sharing my experience seemed impossible. How could I put into words something so immense, so beyond human comprehension? However, I felt the presence of Jesus guiding me every step of the way. He had promised to be with me, and that promise was fulfilled every time I opened my mouth to speak. My first opportunity came unexpectedly. Peter Langley, the skeptical doctor who had been present during my recovery, asked to talk. We met at a cafe, and he seemed restless. "Magnolia," he began, looking down at his coffee cup, "I don't know what I believe, but something about you has changed. You have a peace that I can't explain. Can you tell me more about what happened?" It was there that I gave my first testimony. I spoke about Jesus, about what he showed me, and about the truth that so many ignore or reject. Peter listened silently, his eyes full of questions. In the end, he didn't answer anything directly, but he said something that gave me hope. Maybe I should start reading the Gospel of John. From that day on, I started sharing my story with more people. Some listened with interest, others with skepticism, but I continued. One day during a talk at a local church, I saw a man rise from the pew, tears streaming down his face. He walked up to the altar and said, "I grew up learning that Jesus was just a prophet, but today I realize that he is much more. He is the Son of God." That moment was a confirmation. Even in the midst of doubts and challenges, I knew Jesus was reaching hearts through me. Today, my mission continues. I speak in churches, hospitals, and even at medical conferences, always alerting people to the truth I saw and the urgency of accepting Jesus as Savior. I know that many will still doubt, but I do this for those souls that can still be reached. And now, as I write these words, I address you, the reader. If there is something in your life that seems uncertain, if you have doubts about who Jesus really is, I implore you, seek the truth. Read the Gospel of John. Pray. Ask him to reveal himself to you. As Jesus told me, truth is not just a choice. It is the difference between eternal joy and eternal separation from God. You're just one step away from discovering something that can transform your life and your eternity. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time,